Why do you hate me so much? After all I've done for you? Elizabeth's voice echoed through the house. Because all you've done is bring me shame and mockery. I'm fed up, Tunde yelled back, his voice filled with frustration before he slammed the door behind him. Elizabeth stood frozen. She had not expected it to end this way. They had been through so much together. How it all began. Pastor Chike and his wife were parents to 3 beautiful daughters, Mary, Dorcas and Elizabeth. They lived in a humble apartment in Asaba, Nigeria. Pastor Chike was a well-known pastor and his reputation was spotless. He ran his household with strict discipline, and his daughters, though often amused by his rules, grew to respect them. Every morning, their father would gather them for devotion, reminding them, "You girls will not fall my hand, so behave." To Pastor Chike, his daughter's behavior and reputation meant everything. His words were not just a lesson, they were a command. The girls would hate it sometimes, but they loved their father deeply and knew his ways were meant to protect them. As children, they often joked among themselves, "Daddy's rules are as serious as the Bible." And if you want to be safe in life, just follow Daddy's steps. His discipline was evident in every part of their lives. When it came to marriage, Pastor Chike was particularly protective of his daughters. He would tell them, "Don't be moved by what you see, my dear. With wisdom, you can tell the wheat from the chaff among all these men." His advice was simple but firm. They knew he would not allow just anyone to marry them. They had learned early to trust their father's judgment over their own. As young women, they were admired by many. The girls received constant attention and suitors came knocking at their door. Mary, the eldest, was the first to get married. At 24, she married a pastor just like her father. It wasn't surprising to anyone. Mary had always admired her father the most and wanted a man who shared his faith. Dorcas followed at 20. She married a successful CEO, a man with money, power and influence. Then the unimaginable happened. A car accident claimed Pastor Chike's life. He had been returning from a friend's funeral when the crash occurred. In an instant, their world turned upside down. He was not only their father, but also the one who had shaped their every decision. Without him, Elizabeth felt lost. Her mother, who had always depended on Pastor Chike's decisions, struggled. She was not as involved in their daughters' lives as Pastor Chike. Elizabeth couldn't help but feel a deep sense of grief. She had always dreamed of the day she would bring a man home, confident that her father would know the right questions to ask. She had imagined his approving smile, the way he would look at the man and say, "You can marry my daughter." But now, that dream was shattered. Her father was no longer there to guide her. 26, Elizabeth had a steady job at a law firm. But she felt something was missing. She believed her time was running out. Her sisters had married before 25, and she was still alone. What was wrong with me, she thought. But then, Tunde came into her life. At first, Elizabeth didn't like him. He wasn't a devout Christian. Yes, he went to church, but he also liked to party. He went clubbing and smoked. This was not the man my father would approve of, Elizabeth thought. But Tunde didn't give up easily. He was charming, smart and rich. Elizabeth was the most beautiful of her sisters, and people admired her intelligence. But despite all the attention, she had never felt fully satisfied. She wanted someone who could match her, and somehow, despite her reservations, Tunde was the one who made her feel that way. But the more time they spent together, the more she fell. Then came the battle. Her mother was the first to voice her concerns. "Elizabeth, this boy is not one of us." Elizabeth shook her head, her frustration boiling over. Mommy, God so loved the world and sacrificed for the world. Why can't I love Sunday? You always told us that God's love is what brings repentance and salvation. So why does it have to be different for me and Tunde? He loves me more than any man ever has. If I love him back, maybe I can win him over to God. Don't you believe in the power of love? Her mother sighed, her eyes filled with worry. Elizabeth, love is not enough to build a marriage. You need more than love. You need faith, commitment, and shared values. Elizabeth was determined. Mom, I'll be fine. I'm not asking you to approve of anything. But can you at least trust me? For the sake of peace. If this is what you really want, then we'll give you our blessing, she said, her voice heavy with sadness. Their marriage was lovely, or at least that was what Elizabeth told herself. Everywhere they went, Tunde would sing her praises. He would boast, wrapping an arm around her like a prized possession. At first, Elizabeth loved it. She felt adored and admired. But as time passed, the way he talked about her beauty made her uneasy. It was as if that was the only good thing he saw. When she got pregnant, things got worse. Tunde would remind her daily, "Make sure you don't eat too much, Lizzie. I don't want you looking like Mama Titi." She was always hungry, always tired, but she endured. By the time she was due for delivery, she was weak, too weak to push. The doctor struggled to save her. When she finally gained consciousness, a nurse stood beside her bed, shaking her head. "Madam, you are lucky to be alive," she said. "You had no strength left. I hope you are feeding well." Elizabeth's heart pounded. She couldn't let anyone know she had been starving herself for Tunde. "No, I eat well," she lied, forcing a weak smile. But when her mother arrived for Omogo, Elizabeth's secret was exposed. One afternoon, Mama was in the kitchen making soup when she noticed something strange. "Lizzie, come here," she called, looking at the pot. "Why is there still so much food left? You are breastfeeding, you should be eating well." Elizabeth hesitated. "I eat, Mama, I'm okay." Her mother turned sharply, narrowing her eyes. "You eat? Since I came, all I see you do is drink tea and eat small bread like a child. You barely eat enough for yourself. How much more as a breastfeeding mother? Do you want to die, this girl? You want to die and leave this baby motherless, bah?" Elizabeth's eyes filled with tears. She couldn't say it. She couldn't tell her mother that she was suffering just to look good for Tunde. After her mother left, Elizabeth tried to eat better, but things in her marriage began to change. Tunde started staying out late. At first, he would tell her he had a business trip, but the trips became too frequent. One night, as she rocked their crying baby, she said to Tunde, "Your business trips are not coincidental, right?" He froze for a second, then continued like she hadn't spoken. "You won't even say anything?" Elizabeth asked. Still, he ignored her. She felt her chest tighten. "Tunde, I'm talking to you." He looked at her briefly and sighed. "Lizzie, I'm tired, please." Then he walked into the other room and shut the door. Next morning, Elizabeth was the one who apologized. "I'm sorry for how I acted last night," she whispered. Tunde kissed her forehead. "It's fine, baby. I know you didn't mean it." But deep down, she felt like something was slipping away. Over time, Tunde became more distant. He no longer took her out. He no longer showed her off. He barely even looked at her. Then came the wedding invitation. Elizabeth wanted to go. Darwin, her son, was already 6 months old and she had spent too many days locked inside the house. But as she dressed up, Tunde stopped her. "Ah, honey, you don't need to go," he said, smiling. "You can stay home and rest. You don't need that stress. I'll take you out on a very good day to a better place soon." Elizabeth stared at him. "No, Tunde, you say that like a rehearsed line since forever." A few hours later, he left for the wedding alone, but Elizabeth had a plan. The moment he was gone, she bathed, dressed in her finest gown, and carried Darwin into the car. If Tunde wanted her to stay home, then she had to see why. At the wedding, she searched for him, but he was nowhere in sight. Then she spotted Sam, one of his friends. "Sam!" she called, waving. Sam and his wife, Lisa, rushed to her table. "Tunde finally decided to let us see you guys," Sam's wife said, smiling. "See how beautiful you both look." Elizabeth forced a smile. As Lisa played with Darwin, Sam asked, "Where's Tunde?" Elizabeth blinked. "I was about to ask you. He left way before me, for here." Sam raised his brows. "Eh? Not again, Tunde." Sam excused himself to attend to something, and Elizabeth chatted with Lisa. But as Lisa spoke, Elizabeth's eyes caught something across the hall. Her eyes popped in shock. Tunde was there, smiling, but not at her. He was pulling out a chair for a young woman, his hand lingering on her back. Elizabeth's body went numb. The sounds around her faded. The air in the room felt too thick to breathe. Elizabeth swallowed hard, forcing a smile. She reached for Darwin. "I have to go." Lisa touched her arm. "Are you okay?" Elizabeth nodded. "Yes, I just need to go home. I'm tired." Back home, she sat on the bed, staring at nothing. Immediately, her phone rang. It was Lisa. Elizabeth answered with a weak, "Hello." Lisa sighed. "Lizzie, I'm so sorry. I thought you knew." Elizabeth frowned. Knew what? Lisa hesitated. Tunde, he's been with different women. He always brings them to the different functions we go for. We all thought you knew. Since we hardly saw you and you looked fine, we thought maybe you didn't mind. Something inside Elizabeth cracked. She wanted to speak, but no words came. Her hands trembled as she gripped the phone tighter. Then slowly, tears began to fall. She just cried and cried and cried. Elizabeth waited for Tunde, but he didn't come home early. She sat on the couch in the sitting room, her mind heavy with thoughts. At some point, she dozed off. A loud slam jolted her awake. Tunde had just entered the house. He staggered into the sitting room, smelling of alcohol, and he could barely stand straight. Without looking at her, he fell into the chair and slept off. Elizabeth's chest ached with anger, but she knew there was no point talking to him in this state. She quietly stood up and went to the room. The next morning, when she woke up, he was already gone. That day, everything fell apart. Darwin was sick. He cried and cried, his tiny body hot with fever. Elizabeth was already in a mess, and now the stress doubled. She carried him, rocked him, whispered soft words, but nothing helped. She needed to give him his medicine, but when she searched for it, it was nowhere to be found. She tied Darwin to her back, rushing from the one end of the house to another, turning things upside down, sweat dripping down her face. Her head ached, her body was weak. Just then, Tunde walked in. He stopped at the door and saw her sitting on the floor, tapping Darwin lightly to sleep. "This house is a mess," he shouted. "What have you been doing all day?" But Elizabeth ignored him. "You crawl around this house all day like a pig, messing everywhere," he barked. "Well, how can you be tidy with all this fat?" Then Elizabeth froze. She turned slowly and looked at him. She had waited too long for this moment. She carefully stood up, carried Darwin and went to lay him gently on his bed. She made sure he was comfortable, then returned to her husband. Her eyes burned with tears, but her voice was steady. "What did you say, Tunde?" she asked. "Why, Tunde? What did I do to you? Why have you decided to be a thorn in my flesh? After all I've done for you, you are a wicked man, and you are a very ugly and messed up woman," Tunde shouted back. "With just one child, look how shapeless and dirty you've become." Elizabeth's lips trembled. "So that's why you now sleep with every woman in this town?" she asked. "God will punish you, Tunde. What have I done to deserve this wickedness from you? After all I've sacrificed and still sacrifice for this marriage. I gave up my job just to be here for our son, to be your house help, and this is what I get?" Tunde rolled his eyes. "Sacrifice? Did I force you? All you have done is bring me shame, Lizzie. That is all you've done. Look at the wives of my friends. They're not just beautiful, they are influential. But you, all you do is sit here all day and get fat." Elizabeth felt like the ground beneath her had shattered. She slowly sank to the floor and burst into tears. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. Her sister's warning rang in her ears. She had ignored them. She had believed Tunde would change, but now she saw the truth. Unknown to her, Tunde had lost his job. 2 days later, Elizabeth packed her bags. She arranged her clothes and Darwin's things. She was leaving. Tunde walked into the room and froze. "What are you doing?" he asked. Elizabeth zipped her bag and lifted it. "I'm leaving," she said simply. Tunde's eyes widened. Going to where?" "Anywhere but here." "You're not serious, Lizzie. You can't leave me." Elizabeth laughed bitterly. "Oh, now you care. You care about your dirty pig, right?" Tunde's face changed. "Please, Lizzie," he begged. I was just angry about losing my job, and that's why I said those things. I didn't mean them." Well, that's too late. When she arrived at her mother's house, she was welcomed with open arms. Her mother was happy. She finally left Tunde. For the first time in months, Elizabeth felt peace. Time passed and Elizabeth began to rebuild her life. She got a better job and had to travel out of the country. Months later, she sat on the airplane, Darwin sleeping in her arms. As the plane took off, she looked out of the window. She smiled. The dark days were over. Brighter days were ahead, and she would never look back again.